Chapter 16 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 16. The Saltwater Scout. "Say," exploded Ned White a few minutes later, "we're moving." "Are we?" asked Lieutenant Jack carelessly. "That's strange." Unseen, he had given Ensign F a hand signal. Two barefooted sailors had slipped the mooring, also leaving the gig behind. Now there was a slight throb in the little craft as the propeller shafts turned slowly. "I guess we had better get below," Jack continued. "It's going to be wet weather up here." "The stars are out," scoffed Ned White. "That wouldn't save us from getting wet. I'll wait for you to precede me into the tower." Quite mystified, Ned obeyed the hint. From the tower he passed down into the general cabin. 5 minutes later, Jack sent a seaman to ask him to step up into the tower. As Ned arrived at the little platform, he recoiled. "Say, the water will be in here in a second," he insisted. "Hardly," smiled Lieutenant Benson. "Everything is pretty tight, but the water is pretty close to us, isn't it?" "Where's the boat?" asked Ned wonderingly. "It's all here. You can feel it under you," laughed Jack. "But the tower platform deck is about 4 inches under water, and the forward and after decks a trifle more submerged. As you see, the water is on a level with your chest. The top of the tower is barely more than 2 feet out of water." "But you haven't even the binnacle light on," Ned declared with a slight shiver. "It seems uncanny to be standing in darkness save for the faint light that a few stars give." "And no light comes up from below either," returned Jack. "The sharpest eyes on a craft a quarter of a mile off from us would hardly pick us up without the aid of a searchlight." "And you're running without lights yourself," gasped Ned. "Any other craft might run into us." "Isn't it illegal to run without showing lights?" "For a merchantman or a pleasure craft, yes," Jack admitted. "But a naval vessel may run without lights at the discretion of its commanding officer." "How do you know where you're going when you can't even use your compass?" "Helmsman," said the young submarine commander, "you may tell our guest by what you are steering." "At present, sir," answered the sailor at the wheel without turning around, "we are steering by that star near the western horizon." The sailor was seaman enough to know that the star was the masthead light of a small craft, but Ned wasn't. The light, in fact, was the white masthead light of the Velvet, her green and red sidelights not showing from astern. "It's a queer sensation riding like this," Ned muttered after a few moments. "It's stuffy in here, too, but I don't feel like opening a window." "It would be bad judgment," Jack smiled. "The Atlantic would rush in on us." Ned soon wandered below. To one not in the secret of the chase, it was dull sport to stand long in the wheelhouse, whence nothing could be seen but a wide waste of waters and a few stars, including the false one over by the western horizon. So he went into the cabin below and presently into the wardroom to read. He felt certain that if anything picturesque happened, Jack Benson would send him word in time to witness it. For more than 2 hours Ned remained below. Then, finding himself yawning, he determined to go up into the conning tower once more. But a seaman stopped him near the foot of the steps. "No passengers in the tower at present, sir, by Lieutenant Benson's orders." "What's up?" demanded Ned, with lively interest. "I don't know, sir." "Are we doing anything unusual?" "I think not, sir." "Why, the speed is stopped!" cried Ned in sudden discovery. "Yes, sir, for some little time." "Is anything wrong with the engines?" Ned White demanded rather anxiously. "No, sir. The engines will start promptly whenever the order is given." "Is it against orders for me to remain in the general cabin?" Ned further asked. "No, sir. The only orders relate to going up into the conning tower, the turret, sir." So young Mr. White plumped himself down on a cabin seat, a prey to lively curiosity. In the meantime, Lieutenant Jack Benson had followed the schooner for more than 12 miles out to sea. yet always keeping a full 2 miles to the rear of her. At last the schooner laid to, so the Grant's speed was also stopped. At times one or the other or both of the schooner's sidelights showed. That was why Benson did not want the boat's guest up in the conning tower. It wouldn't have taken Ned long to conclude that the submarine's business was to keep track of the vessel that displayed sidelights. At the moment of starting to lay to, the seaman at the wheel was ordered below. The 3 young submarine officers remained in the tower, all of them watching the schooner, with such aid as they could derive from the use of their night glasses. Waiting for some other vessel as sure as guns, Jack commented as he watched the idling schooner. "She'll have a fairly long wait, too, for there isn't another light in sight," Eph muttered. "Odd how lonely the ocean looks at times." From time to time the Grant's engines were stirred long enough to enable the submarine craft to turn slowly around. Lying there semi-submerged without lights was risky business, and the sharpest watch had to be kept to see that they did not suddenly find themselves under some other vessel's bows, with danger to both. Moreover, Benson did not propose to allow any other vessel to get close enough to make out the submarine's conning tower. The fact would be sure to be reported, and the report might even reach the eyes or ears of the skipper of the Velvet. Time dragged by. Ned stretched himself on one of the long cabin seats and was soon sound asleep. "The schooner ought to be putting back soon," commented Hal, when his watch showed the time to be 2:30 in the morning. "It will soon be dawn, and surely smugglers wouldn't take a chance of transferring a cargo in broad daylight." 5 minutes after Hal had spoken the words, all 3 of the young officers made out the fact that the schooner had hauled in on her sheets and was standing back toward the coast. "Watch below," Jack called down. "Aye, aye, sir." "Has Mr. White turned in?" "He's asleep on the cabin seat, sir." "Then present my compliments and tell him that if he will hurry up here he will see something worth while." "Aye, aye, sir." Hal, in the meantime, had signaled the engine room, and the Grant was now turning around. Though Ned hurried, yet by the time he stood on the steering platform in the tower, the submarine's stern was turned to the schooner and her lights not visible. "Now, Mr. White, watch for something," smiled Jack. "What are you going to do?" "Watch." Lieutenant Jack's hand was on a lever. As he moved it, the platform began to slant forward. At the same time Ned White saw the rather still waters of the Atlantic Ocean wash over his head. The effect was so startling that the guest gave a quick gasp. "We're under water," he almost stammered. "Yes," Jack laughed, "and going lower." "How much lower?" "I'll let you read the gauge for yourself presently." "I couldn't read a gauge with 100-foot figures on it in this darkness," protested Ned. For answer, now that they were under water, Ensign Hal switched on the electric light. The interior of the tower was now brilliantly flooded with light. "Come below," urged Lieutenant Jack Benson, "and I'll show you how far down we are." For the youthful commander had just released the lever after having brought the Grant once more to an even keel. As they went below, Jack called, "Watch, helmsman," and a seaman stepped briskly forward. "Report to Mr. Somers at the wheel." "Very good, sir." Jack now led the way over to the gauge. "You can read, Mr. White. The figures are quite plain." "Does that gauge say that we're 90 feet below the surface of the ocean?" demanded the young man from the State Department. "Yes, but why so much below?" "Because 90 feet is considerably more than the draft of any steamship that floats. It would never do when we are below to get hit by the keel of any passing steamship." "Ugh," muttered Ned, with a little shudder. Then he laughed. Jack went on to exhibit the mechanism that controlled the craft in diving. He also explained how it was that the Grant could be brought to the surface again at the will of her commander. "Benson," cried Ned White, in a sudden increase of admiration for his young host, "do you know you're a wonderful fellow?" "I fooled some people that same way before." Jack laughed quietly. "No, but honestly." 15 minutes later the Grant's floor began to slope sternward. "Are we going up?" asked Ned. "Yes, just to take an observation. Then we'll undoubtedly drop again." "May I go up in the tower now?" Jack didn't really want his guest up there, as he didn't want Ned to have any chance of guessing what this trip was really for. So he replied, "Wait until we make our final rise. Then go up with me." "Oh, all right." Within 30 seconds after she had projected her turret conning tower slightly above the waves, the Grant made another gradual dive, again running at 90 feet under water. This rise had been taken in order to ascertain if the schooner was still headed shoreward. From the fact that no report was made to him, young Lieutenant Benson knew that the schooner was still on the same course, so he remained chatting with his guest. At first Jack had curiously watched his guest's face to see whether young White was alarmed to find himself beneath the surface. Ned had been a bit nervous, but had shown no cowardice during the dive, as had so many curious landlubbers. It is not every man who can remain calm on a submarine when she's going down. Twice more the boat rose, Ned curiously watching with Jack what he could see of the mechanism of reaching the surface through expelling the water from the diving tanks by means of compressed air. "I wouldn't have missed this night for anything," young White declared enthusiastically after the third rise and dive. "When we rise again," Jack replied, "we shall stay on the surface until we enter Boxhaven Bay." Presently the watch below came to report that the commanding officer was desired in the tower. "Come along now," invited Jack, resting a hand on his friend's arm. As they entered the tower, the light there was brilliant. Jack placed his hand on one of the levers, next commanding, "Switch off the lights. Now, White, look for the most rapid rise to the surface that we've had tonight." As blackness came over the scene, Ned felt the floor tipping at such an angle that he clutched at Eph Somers. With a quick rush, the top of the tower shot above the waves. Then the platform came out of the water. Next, the forward deck emerged, water sliding off. "Come out on deck," was Jack's invitation as he threw open the entrance. "My, but it seems good to be out in the open again," breathed Ned White. "Still, I want to be with you when you do some deeper diving. This sort of life would soon fascinate me more than anything else in the world." Jack's first unobserved glance had told him that the schooner Velvet was some 4 miles astern. She had been well distant on the run-in. Now the Grant's speed was increased, though the submarine still refrained from showing lights. It was almost daylight when they entered the bay, but Benson could see no one stirring on shore. The submarine glided in to her moorings and lay there as though she had been at the same spot all night. "I'm going to take a nap now in earnest," gaped Ned White, starting below. End of chapter 16. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 17 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 17. Wally Wimpins, Man of Vengeance. "What I want," proclaimed Eph Somers, "is shore leave. It was afternoon. All of the submarine boys had slept, and all were therefore refreshed. To be more definite, smiled Jack Benson, what you really want is something in the ice cream soda line. Oh, I might get rid of 3 or 4 of them, Summers conceded, but the main thing that I want on shore is a good walk along a good old rustic road. I'm a country boy, you know. You'll be back on board by 6 o'clock, won't you? Benson inquired. Oh, easily. Go ahead then and take your shore leave. Eph started for the deck. Oh, by the way, Lieutenant Jack called after him, hold the boat until I can put on sit clothes too, and I'll run ashore. Going on a walk with me? No, I shall have other fish to fry, but I want to go on shore just the same. Up on deck, under the awning, sat Ned White with Hal. The young man from the State Department did not care about going ashore. He was enjoying the sea breeze that blew in under the awning. On shore, the submarine boys parted company. Eph went to the nearest drugstore, where he surrounded 5 ice cream sodas and vanquished them. Then he started to find his road, one that turned up by the Hotel Bel Air and stretched off toward a green forest in the distance. Just as Eph went by the rear portion of the hotel, he was spied by no less a personage than Wally Wimpins, the would-be young actor whom Eph had floored in the Arlington in Washington. Wally had a summer engagement here at Boxhaven, though one that had no connection with the stage. Wally had arrived 2 days before to serve as a waiter at the Bel Air. There wasn't much glory in being a waiter, but Wally had reasoned that there was at least a living in it, and that the tips from guests ought to salve his wounded feelings. Today he was to have his first afternoon off, and had already dressed for it. When he spied Summers, the new waiter's eyes opened very wide. "That's he!" cried Wally. "I couldn't mistake him anywhere. That's the same kid with sunburst hair that treated me to the wallop in Washington. I'd like to wait on him for just one meal. But he's going by, and I have 3 hours of my own time this afternoon. I'll follow Sunburst Hair and see if there's any safe and easy way of handing him back the wallop that he loaned me." Giving Eph time to get a little more of a start, Wally followed carefully, his mind bent wholly on thoughts of vengeance. Wally, like many of his weak-minded kind, imagined himself a desperate man whom it was highly dangerous to offend. "If I get that kid where I want him this afternoon," Wimpins told himself fiercely, "I'll make him sing mighty low for once. If I can only get him down and make him beg for mercy, then I'll read Sunburst a little lecture on keeping his fists to himself." There were sheltering walls and little stretches of groves that ran near the road. Wally had very little trouble in following his intended prey, and took but a moderate chance of being discovered. Passing through one of the groves which bordered on the wagon road, Wally Wimpins' heart gave a sudden leap of joy. Lying in the path before him lay a heavy 3-foot stake. "This thing will put us on an equal footing," gloated the simpleton, pouncing upon his prize. "My, but it's stout and hard. I'll get in front of Sunburst with this, and tell him what a royal thumping he's about to receive." I can see him turn pale. I can see his lower jaw drop. These bullies are always cowards. I've read as much somewhere. Though the way across the fields and through little stretches of woods made rough walking for Wally, whose feet were already tired from standing still behind the chairs of Bel Air guests, Mr. Wimpins managed to hide his discomfort even from himself. His whole being was actuated by the hunger for vengeance. He could think of nothing else. One swift, hard thump with this fine old piece of wood Wally told himself, and then I can stand over him while he crouches at my feet. Oh, little does he imagine who is on his trail this afternoon. Though the simpleton could not comprehend the fact, Eph Somers, in truth, would have been but very little disturbed had he known just who was pursuing him and why. At last the lonely road began to wind through a stretch of forest. Eph walked on, Wally now limping, though keeping manfully to his self-appointed task of revenge. At last, however, Mr. Wimpins felt that he could go no further if he was to save enough of his feet to get back to Boxhaven. He'll come back this way anyway, thought Wally, sinking to the grass near the road. And when he does come, oh, won't I hand it to him? As for Ensign Eph, the young officer kept on for some distance further. Finally, however, his watch informed him that it was time to turn back from the most delightful walk he had had in many a day. Here in the woods, where no one would meet him or know the submarine boy, even if a meeting did take place, Eph had his coat off and on his arm, while he fanned his perspiring face with his straw hat. Wally, with his ear close to the ground, heard the tramp of the returning pedestrian. He rose to his knees, peering eagerly. "It's Sunburst, all right," glowed Wimpins. "Now I'll hide behind that tree. As Sunburst passes me, I'll land one on his pate that would have been worthy of good old Robin Hood himself. Ha! Tremble, caitiff, for thy doom is indeed near. There does not live the man who may affront Mr. Wallace Wimpins and trust to go unscathed." Eph came along at a swinging walk, unaware that there was another human being within a mile of him. The broad oak tree's trunk wholly concealed the vengeful Wimpins. Whistling softly, young Ensign Somers strolled by the tree. Wally slipped quietly around the trunk to avoid chance of being seen. Then, with the soft tread of a stage villain whom he had often admired, Wimpins stole up behind the unsuspecting submarine boy, the stake uplifted. Some slight sound must have caught Eph's ear, for he started to turn. Not a second was to be lost if Wimpins was to be sure of his revenge. Whack! Down came the club on Eph's hatless cranium. Wally struck somewhat harder than he had intended. Naturally, Eph fell to the ground. As he did so, he rolled over on his back in order to get an instant glance at whatever had collided with him. Wally bounded a step forward, then placed one foot on Eph's chest. "Ha, varlet! Now we change places," he cried shrilly, brandishing the club menacingly. "I'm quite willing to change places," grunted young Somers. "You shall lie here in the road, and I'll take that piece of kindling wood and jab you one for luck." "Silence, dog!" hissed Wally. "Dog, am I?" demanded Eph. "Then whose pup are you?" "Darest thou insult me?" quivered Wimpins. "Then indeed shalt thou rue this day." That Eph Somers didn't at once push aside the foot and leap to his feet, ready to avenge the blow that had laid him low, was due solely to the swift belief that came to him. That belief was to the effect that he was dealing with an escaped lunatic. Ensign Somers wasn't of the sort to deal roughly with a lunatic. He decided on a conversational method of soothing this violent young spindling. "Is this your usual way of greeting friends on the road?" Eph inquired mildly. "Friends?" demanded Wally scornfully. "No, fool. This is the way I meet mine enemies and strike terror to their hearts. In me behold a man who can wait patiently for years for vengeance. In me behold one who, when wronged, worships devoutly at the shrine of sweet vengeance. Clean daffy, was Eph's inward comment. I don't believe I ever met anyone before so wholly dippy as this chap is. Then he asked, You speak of me as an enemy. How do you know I am? I can't remember that I ever before had the pleasure of meeting you. Villain, add not lying to thine other crimes, ordered Wally sternly. Dost dare deny that but the other morn thou lookest upon me in the caravansary of the chief city of the province? I don't know that address. Didst not leave thy two companions and walk over and strike me down? Demanded Wally, his eyes gleaming. Didst not smite me with thy fist and stretch me on the ground before thee? Answer, caitiff. Say, blurted Eph Somers suddenly, are you the tallow dip that I had to knock down in the Arlington at Washington? I am the same, proclaimed Wally, but now the tables are turned. I am uppermost in power here. Beg, varlet, beg. All right, returned Eph Somers coolly. The first petition I have to offer is that you kindly take your soiled shoe off my chest. If you're not quick about it, I shall have to remove the foot myself. Thou durst not, hissed Wally, but incur my slightest displeasure, and thou perisheth. I'll talk that over with you when I'm on my feet, promised Eph. Gripping Wally's foot, he pushed it aside with a grin. Next he prepared himself for a spring to his feet. Now was Wally Wimpkins assailed with sudden terror. This valiant youth no longer yearned for combat. He must act in self-protection, so he swung his stake. This time he brought it down on Eph's head with greater force. Ensign Somers fell back in grim silence. The stake had done its work. He lay on his side in the road, neither moving nor offering to speak. Wally bent over him in terror, all the bravado oozing swiftly out of him. Ah, woe the day for me, wailed Wimpins. I have killed him. Then he turned and fled, like all cowards, leaving in the middle of the road this victim of his fantastic ideas of vengeance. They'll arrest me if they catch me near here, shrieked Wally Wimpins as he dashed wildly into the woods. End of chapter 17. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 18 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 18. Jake sees a really specter. 3 young men sat around the wardroom table on the Grant. 2 of them were in uniform, the third their guest, Ned White. It was 6 o'clock. The wardroom steward stood behind Lieutenant Benson's chair, awaiting the order to serve. We'll wait dinner a few minutes longer, Jack proposed. What can be keeping Eph? Wondered Hal Hastings anxiously. Any one of a dozen or a score of inconsequential things, returned Ned White lightly. Why are you fellows so uneasy? You don't know all about the ways of the service, smiled Jack. Punctuality is one of the first lessons of this life, and Mr. Somers is always so punctual that you could set your watch by his return. So I see, scoffed Ned, who, not being in the least worried, was fully prepared to do justice to his appetite. At last, when Jack found the time to be 6:15, he turned to the waiter to say, "Pass the word to the gunner's mate to recall the gig from the shore. The boat's crew will want their supper. When you have passed the word, then you may begin to serve us." By 7 o'clock, the meal was finished, but Eph was still missing. "I can't stand this much longer," confessed Jack Benson, rising from table. "Waiter, find out if the boat's crew have finished their meal." "Yes, sir," reported the waiter, coming back. "Then pass word to the gunner's mate that I shall want the gig at once." "Very good, sir. And beg pardon, sir. Well, it has begun to rain, sir. Thank you. I will get my rain clothes." Though his own rain clothes were in his cabin, Lieutenant Jack came out with the set he had borrowed from Ned White. "Oh, these are yours, Mr. White. I had meant to return them earlier," Jack declared. "Put 'em on for tonight," begged White. "Don't go back for your own." So Jack donned the long rubber coat and sou'wester. "And I believe I'll go with you," yawned Ned, rising from the table. "Then I'll get out of your clothes," smiled Lieutenant Jack. "Don't do anything of the sort, my dear fellow. Just lend me yours. They'll fit." This exchange was therefore made. The two stepped into the gig as it was brought alongside. Once on shore, Ned suggested, "Suppose we go to the Hotel Belleair first. Somers may be dining there." Jack shook his head. "If not, and if something has happened to Somers," Ned continued, "the hotel will be the most likely place to have the news." So they turned in at the hotel and spent some little time there making inquiries. There was no word, however, to be had of Eph. Wally heard of the inquiry made. He had returned to the hotel as being the safest place for him. He was pallid-faced, quaking, and ready to scream from terror. When he heard that Somers was being sought, and heard the description, too, Wally watched his chance to flee to a shed in the hotel steward's department. There Wally Wimpins crouched in the dark, starting at every sound. "Strange we don't get any word of Somers here," murmured Ned. "I'm going further," Jack declared, looking genuinely worried at last. "You might stay here, White, and telephone as you think best. I'm going through the village a bit." For within the last few minutes a very gruesome suggestion had been growing to the submarine boy's mind. He began to believe that Eph, trying to do some sleuthing on his own account against the smugglers, had fallen afoul of them. "And I believe Skipper Redbeard would kill a man in order to escape," thought Jack darkly. So his reflections, as he hurried forth, were not altogether comfortable ones. It seemed unlikely that Eph Somers would come across a larger fight than he could handle. Yet where was he? It was quite dark now, and the rain was falling heavily. Almost unconsciously, Benson's steps turned in the direction of the little pier where the schooner Velvet docked. Prudence being always strong in Jack, he advanced cautiously now. It would be a betrayal of his mission from the Navy Department to expose himself in any way that might result in putting Skipper Redbeard and Jake on their guard. So as he came in sight of the pier, Jack Benson stepped behind a tree trunk, determining to look over the scene before advancing. The white masthead light hung from the schooner's foremast head, but there was no sign of life aboard. "I wonder if the bulldog is about again, and if he'll know me well enough to let me alone this time," thought the submarine boy. For some minutes he peered intently. Presently he forgot to take account of his surroundings other than the pier. He was startled, therefore, to hear steps approaching from behind. There was just time to slip behind the tree when two figures passed. "A nasty night," he heard Jake say. "Yes, vouches have fed the skipper, but darker it is better for us. Dark nights for mine." "Then you—" Right then and there Jake closed his jaws with a snap. He walked faster and strode out on the pier. "What are you in such a hurry for?" bawled Skipper Redbeard. But Jake neither replied nor halted until he was almost down to the schooner's side. Then he wheeled, coming back slowly. "What in blazes ails you?" growled Redbeard. "I saw it," gasped Jake, his eyes rolling. "Now, confound you for an idiot. What did you see?" demanded the skipper hoarsely. "I saw it, I tell you," Jake insisted in quavering accents. "Now, which it? Or how many?" "What are you talking about, anyway?" growled the exasperated skipper. "I saw the ghost of that fellow you threw overboard the other night," quavered Jake. "Stop your nonsense," roared the skipper, seizing Jake and shaking him roughly. "I didn't throw any man overboard, and you know it." "Well, then, the fellow that jumped overboard and didn't show up again." He was drowned anyway, and I tell you that I just saw his ghost. He had on the same rain clothes that he was drowned in." "Where did you see him?" demanded the skipper, becoming suddenly suspicious. "Over there, right behind that tree," Jake declared, pointing. "Why didn't you say so before?" demanded the skipper. "Come along, we'll look into that." Skipper Redbeard started on a fast run, but Jake didn't follow. Instead, the deckhand remained rooted to the middle of the pier, a prey to fear. He neither dared follow his chief nor venture aboard the schooner, where it would be just his luck to run plumb into that awful ghost. "There was nothing there, you tarnal, chuckle-headed fool," growled Redbeard, returning. "I knew there wasn't, but I went and looked, just to show you how big a fool you are." "I tell you," cried Jake solemnly, "I saw nothing," bellowed Redbeard. "Now get aboard with you and cast off," continued the skipper. "We've got to make an early start tonight on account of the wind being against us. Hustle." Jack Benson, of course, had not waited to be discovered, but had slipped away. "So I'm a ghost, am I?" chuckled Jack. "I'll save that up." Then he hurried to the hotel, where the landlord promised to do all in his power to get word of Eph Somers. As a naval officer, Benson was bound, first of all, to keep that little schooner in sight. Before the Velvet's white light was much more than a mile out at sea, the submarine Grant was ready to follow. End of chapter 18. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 19 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 19. Watching the Ocean Prey. "Benson," remonstrated Ned White, after they had boarded the Grant, "I really don't see how you had the heart to do it." "Do what?" "Why, order another practice tonight, when you were so uncertain about poor Somers." "I have to do it," was Lieutenant Jack's low reply. "Orders from Washington?" "Yes," Jack answered, not untruthfully. "Oh, all right, then," murmured White. "I suppose you naval officers have to follow orders ahead of everything else." "I don't suppose you could leave me behind to hunt for Eph," whispered Ensign Hal Hastings. "Not properly," Jack answered. "As it is, we're putting to sea one officer shy, and to leave two on shore would be a highly unwise procedure." "Say, can't I get ashore yet?" asked Ned, ready to volunteer in the search for Eph Somers. "Yes, but you wouldn't know how to do anything that the landlord of the Belleair can't do," Benson replied. "I suppose that's so," Ned admitted reluctantly. As a matter of fact, Benson was now quite convinced that Eph had in some way run afoul of the smugglers. "If that's the case, and we can catch them tonight," Lieutenant Jack reflected, "that may be the quickest way of getting word of where poor Eph is, if he's still alive." Hal touched Jack's arm, then looked seaward. On account of the rain, the schooner's light would not be as plainly visible as it would be on a clearer night. "Mr. White, you and I will go below," proposed Jack briskly. "The gig has been secured to the mooring, and we'll get under way now." "Are you going to allow me to stand in the tower and watch the maneuver?" White inquired innocently. "Not until later," Jack replied. "You and I will go below." The last thing above that the deck watch did was to cast the submarine off from the moorings. Then the conning tower was closed tightly, and the start made with no light showing beyond the submarine. Hal was on duty in the tower, standing beside the helmsman. Just as soon as they were clear of the bay and the water was deep enough, Ensign Hal semi-submerged the craft, so that only the upper portion of the tower was above water. Somehow it makes a fellow feel restless, sitting down here and not having a glimpse of what is happening," remarked White. "If you remain with us a month, you'll be so used to it that you could turn in your berth and go sound asleep when you knew we were 100 feet under water," smiled Lieutenant Jack. "Do your men sleep when you're under water?" "No, for the simple reason that when we're down deep it's common sense for the men to be awake and dressed. Yet any one of them would be willing enough to turn in right now and never wonder what we were going to do with the craft. Have you never gone under water and then experienced a lot of difficulty in getting back to the surface?" "Yes," Jack admitted candidly. "I remember once when we were below for a long time and never expected to see the surface again. The same thing happened to us a second time when we had a squad of Annapolis midshipmen on board." "Whew!" Ned White stirred uneasily. "But you see that we're still here," smiled Jack. "Perhaps the third time you won't be as fortunate," hinted the young man from the State Department. "We never give that idea a single thought," Jack replied. "If we did, it would unfit us for our work, perhaps. But men of the Navy must be ready for death in whatever form it comes. Take our vessel that was lost a good many years ago in the Samoan hurricane. She was at anchor, and the hurricane seemed to come out of a clear sky. That ship with all its crew was dragged loose from anchorage and hurried along to wreck. All hands were lost. Yet just as the waves washed over that craft, the sailors were manning the yards and cheering lustily while the band was playing the Star-Spangled Banner." "Some nerve about that," muttered Ned. "Americans always have that sort of nerve when the time comes," Jack returned. "Nor is American nerve confined to the Army or Navy." "I wonder if I'd have it," pondered White half aloud. "I'm sure you would, but I hope you won't need it tonight." "Oh, well, a fellow can't die more than once, can he?" muttered Ned, rising and walking about restlessly for a few moments. Then he laughed and sat down again. Jack joined in that laugh. "Don't mind, White," he urged. "You've just been having a little touch of submarine-itis, that's all." "Did you ever have it?" "Sometimes at first," Jack confessed, "but it soon wears off. If you spend most of your time aboard a submarine craft, as we do, you'd soon begin to pity the folks in our large cities who are constantly risking death from being run down by streetcars or automobiles. The only forms of death of which most men are afraid are those with which they happen to be unfamiliar. Have you ever seen folks afraid of a flash of lightning?" "Have I?" echoed Ned. "Yet did you ever see a telegraph operator who works with electricity all day long afraid of lightning? Did you ever see a veteran horseman afraid of a fall that might break his neck? Have you ever known of a railroad engineer to be afraid to enter his car and start hauling an express train?" "I guess a fellow is a fool to be afraid of anything whatever," decided young Mr. White. "Fear doesn't sit very well on any human being," Jack Benson declared quietly. "I hope Somers has been located," said Ned, to change what was becoming a disagreeable subject. "So do I," Jack answered gravely. "What do you think has happened to him?" "How can I guess? But I won't attempt to guess. If we are at anchor tomorrow I shall put in a whole day looking for him, unless he has shown up before then. Of only one thing am I absolutely certain, and that is that something has befallen Eph that prevented his return, or he'd have been back on board by 6 this evening." "Mr. Hastings' compliments, sir, and he'd be glad of your company in the tower." "Does that include me?" coaxed Ned. as Lieutenant Jack rose promptly. I'm afraid it doesn't, but I'll take you into the tower as soon as I may properly do it. Then Benson quickly ascended the steps, standing beside his chum on the platform. I thought you'd want to know, sir, said Hal quietly, that I have observed 3 skyward flashes from a searchlight over to the westward. Just what I do want to know, Jack admitted. How long ago were the flashes? Just before I sent for you. Did the flashes follow in quick succession? Yes. Any more flashes since? No, sir. It must have been a signal, Jack mused. I'll stay with you and watch if more come. 10 minutes passed, during which the seaman at the wheel steered like an automaton. Over to the westward, the Velvet was still under way, with all sail set. This the young officers could make out through their night glasses. There go the flashes again, cried Jack. And they're more to the northwest than before, Hal added in a low voice. I'm counting them, said Jack. The flashes are in pairs this time. Now they've stopped. 6 in all, 3 pairs. And there's the schooner, changing her course, muttered Hal, in a tone of some excitement. She's trimming more to the northward, which shows that the schooner recognizes the signal as being meant for her. Jack went on. Of course, Hal Hastings agreed. Then we've made no mistake whatever. The schooner is all that we suspected. Here the seaman at the wheel broke in. End of chapter 19. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 20 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 20. Jack calls for the 3-pounder. Mr. Hastings, will you tell me, sir, if I'm to change our course? Keep after the schooner's light, Hal directed. Go wherever she goes, but keep the same distance away from her as at present. Very good, sir. By the way, Corliss, broke in Jack's low voice, remember that whatever passes tonight is in the line of duty. Aye, aye, sir. You may learn some things from the talk between Mr. Hastings and myself that you are not to repeat even to members of the crew. Very good, sir. Then you will keep a tight watch over your tongue. Aye, aye, sir. Jack was satisfied. He knew that the jackies of the American Navy are to be depended upon when they are trusted. If he failed tonight to detect any act of smuggling, it would not do to have the word get ashore the next day that the Grant had been slipping stealthily through the sea at night to intercept smugglers. Corliss, Lieutenant Jack continued, I will tell you what we are engaged in doing tonight, as it may help you to more intelligent action if anything happens suddenly. Under orders from the department, we are trying to catch the schooner and some other craft, doubtless a steamship, in the act of transferring smuggled goods. I understand, sir, replied Seaman Corliss. Thank you, sir. You're thanking me for what? Jack pressed him. For your confidence, sir. It always makes a man feel better when he finds that he is trusted by his officers. And you will be careful not to speak of smugglers to your mates. I shall not mention the word to anyone, sir, until I have your permission. Thank you, Corliss. I am satisfied that I have made no mistake in telling you as much as I have. May I speak, sir? Asked Corliss. Certainly. Then, sir, I have been certain for an hour at least that you are trailing a smuggler. What gave you that idea? Why, I suspected it, sir, because the circumstances wouldn't fit into anything else, sir. Then, laughed Jack very quietly, I'm glad I told you and imposed secrecy on you. It wasn't necessary to pledge me to secrecy, sir. I belong to the Navy too, sir. and I know how to hold my tongue when things shouldn't be told." "There go the flashes again," interposed Ensign Hal. "1, 2, 9, 3 sets of 3 flashes this time." "A string of signal lanterns, red, white, and blue, going up to the schooner's main mast, sir," reported Seaman Corliss. "That shows that we haven't been detected," mused Lieutenant Jack aloud. "Why?" Hal asked. "Because if she had sighted us, the schooner wouldn't be displaying signals to the other vessel." "Unless we're detected, and Skipper Redbeard is signaling the other craft that there is danger near," suggested Hastings. "Good. I had overlooked that chance. Corliss, 3 points to the northward." "3 points it is, sir." Jack watched until the submarine's submerged nose had swung around as he desired. "Steady." "Steady it is, sir." "The schooner is laying to," Hal reported. "Her sails are flapping." Jack himself reached for the speed indicator, soon slowing the Grant down to mere headway. "I changed the course," young Lieutenant Benson explained, "because I have an idea that the incoming craft with the searchlight will send out at least one more flash. That will be when she picks up the schooner. At that time, we don't want to be within range of the flash and have our turret seen." Hal spoke but little now. He was swinging his night glass over a wide angle. "I think I see a steamship," he announced at last. Jack Benson raised his own glass. "You're right," he declared finally. "I can make out the big black hull with considerable distinctness. There she is, turning northward now, and the schooner is hauling in sheets and filling to follow," reported Seaman Corliss. "How soon are you going to run in and show yourself?" asked Hal, after some moments of silent work with the night glasses. "Just as soon as I'm sure of finding some of the goods on both craft," Jack answered. "When the moment comes, it will have to be decidedly fast work. We must be sure to have both steamship and schooner clearly implicated in the smuggling." "I wonder if the steamship folks will put up a fight," Hal Hastings mused. "It wouldn't be good judgment, would it?" laughed Lieutenant Jack grimly. "This craft could sink the biggest dreadnought afloat." "But you wouldn't sink a steamship?" Hal demanded. "Hardly. But the fear of our powers may stop the captain of the steamship from trying to make any resistance, especially if he has passengers aboard." Hal Hastings added, "I hope he has." Jack, even while talking, held his glass to his eyes. "There goes the flash, sir," reported Corliss. "The steamship is picking up the schooner. Now he has found her." "The steamship is slowing down," Jack went on, "and the schooner is crowding on all speed to get up astern of the steamship. We shall soon have exciting work. It's a pity White can't be up here and see this game." "I'll let him come up," Jack nodded, "just as soon as we see any evidence of the cargo being transferred." The steamship's flashlight was not again seen. Plainly, the captain knew that brilliant beam could work 2 ways, by attracting to his own vessel and the schooner rather too much curiosity on the part of vessels that might soon be passing. "Bring us up to the surface, Mr. Hastings," directed Lieutenant Jack Benson. 5 minutes later. "I'm certain now that the steamship is passing cargo to the Velvet. The goods are going over the stern of the ship, and the schooner's boat is picking them up." As Hal Hastings rang the signal bell, seamen below sprang up to execute the orders that would speedily follow on the indicator. End of chapter 20. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 21 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 21. Action all in a minute. Silently, the men on duty below worked at their stations. From their compartments, enough water was expelled by compressed air to allow the Grant to rise and ride the waves. "Gunner's mate," Lieutenant Jack called down the turret stairs. "Aye, aye, sir." "Uncover the 3-pounder. Be prepared to send it up with 6 rounds of ammunition, 2 blank and 4 with projectiles." "Aye, aye, sir." "Deck watch?" 2 seamen promptly reported. "Open the turret so that we can get out on deck, Mr. White." Under the influence of the stirring action around him, Ned White, agog with curiosity, sprang to the foot of the stairs, unconsciously saluting. "You may come on deck now, Mr. White, and see what's going to happen." "You may just wager that I want to see," breathed White quickly as he ran up the steps. "When I hear the order for cannon and ammunition on a warcraft, I want to know all about it." Jack was just outside the turret, standing on the platform deck. Almost at White's heels came men with the 3-pound cannon. Another seaman brought up the rear with the 6 shells wanted. Quickly the gun was secured in place forward. The gunner's mate slipped in a blank shot without even waiting for the order. "Mr. Hastings," rang Jack Benson's order, "bear down on the steamship at full speed. Gunner's mate, stand by the gun to fire a blank shot as soon as I direct. Mr. Hastings, station a man to turn on the searchlight as soon as I give the order." Away raced the Grant, nor did it appear as though anyone on the steamship detected the advance of the submarine through the drizzling rain. All this time the steamship was proceeding slowly. As the Grant drew nearer, it could be seen that men at the stern of the steam craft were throwing larger sized packages overboard. These floated, and a single man in a small boat, doubtless Jake, was securing them. Lieutenant Benson waited until within a quarter of a mile of the steamship. Then his orders snapped out. "Flash the light. First over the steamer's stern, then forward. Gunner's mate, ready." As the searchlight lay suddenly across the steamer, a sudden commotion could be detected on board. Men were running to and fro. "Fire!" shouted the young submarine commander. The sharp crack of the 3-pounder sounded out over the waters. "Run in close, Mr. Hastings, and I'll hail the steamship." Suddenly a glare of light from the steamship lay across the submarine boat. From the steamship's bridge went up a howl of consternation. Other men could now be seen running forward. Benson's own searchlight had shown a heap of merchandise in large cases piled up aft. Now, as if by magic, these cases began to vanish. "Steamship ahoy!" shouted Benson through the megaphone as he ran his craft up alongside. "Lay to! We're going to send a party aboard." "Who are you?" demanded a hoarse voice from the bridge. "The United States submarine boat Grant, Lieutenant Jack Benson commanding." "Will you kindly go to blazes?" roared a voice from the bridge. "Lay to, sir, or it'll be the worst for you," Jack returned. "You've taken your nameplate down from the pilot house, but you forgot the one on your bow. You are the steamship Bengo. You will find yourselves in worse trouble if you don't lay to for us to send a party on board. If you're not a revenue cutter, and I know you're not, I won't lay to for you," raved the man on the steamship's bridge. "Then we'll board, sir, anyway, and all the responsibility for any damage done will rest on your head, sir," Jack declared. United States seamen armed with rifles now appeared on deck. The gunner's mate brought Lieutenant Jack's sword, which that young man hung at his belt. Close in ran the Grant, just as the steamer's engine room gong rang for full speed ahead. The Grant's engine room indicator showed the call for increased speed, too. Once more, the little submarine ran up close alongside the steamship. Forward a seaman threw a line. Uncoiling upward it went, the end passing around one of the ship's davits. Then down again it came. The Grant's helmsman ran in so close that the submarine lay bumping against the side of the steamship. As the sailor caught the end of the rope, he passed both ends to a mate. Now the first seaman nimbly started to climb up the double rope. "Go back, or I'll cut the rope," angrily warned one of the ship's officers, knife in hand. Jack Benson snatched a rifle from a seaman nearby, aiming at the officer. "Get back, my man, or I'll drop you," Benson shouted up. "You daren't shoot," taunted the officer above. "I'll give you until I count 3, and then prove that I dare shoot, and that I can shoot straight," Jack retorted coolly. 1, 2. But the ship's officer was gone from the rail. The Jackie kept on with his climb, however, going over the rail and unslinging his own rifle. "Throw that sailor overboard," ordered the voice from the bridge. "The fellow that tries it won't have any too much fun," chuckled the naval seaman, cocking his weapon. It wasn't loaded, but the seaman was the only one on deck who knew that. Several men and women, evidently passengers, had started down on the port side of the promenade deck out of curiosity. "Better get back, ladies and gentlemen," warned the sailor. "Maybe there's going to be trouble and shooting here." At this moment, Lieutenant Benson climbed over the rope. He leaped to the deck, then turned to signal for more men to follow. As soon as he had 3 men on deck with him, Benson left one on guard to stand by the rope. With the other 2, he strode forward to the wheelhouse. The door was locked. "Open this door," Jack commanded. "It will not be open to you," thundered the man on the bridge. "Are you the master of this ship?" Jack demanded, glancing up at the bridge. "I am." "Then, sir, I can only inform you that you are making an unnecessary lot of trouble for yourself. This ship is hereby seized in the name of the United States government as a lawful prize." "You'll have to prove that yet," raged the man on the bridge. 2 more naval sailors came forward at this moment. "Go up on the bridge and place that fellow under arrest," Benson commanded. The 2 sailors started up readily, but the skipper met them, dealing one of the seamen a hard blow on the head that sent him rolling to the deck below. "Club him with your rifle," shouted the young lieutenant angrily, for it enraged him to see one of his seamen struck down in the faithful discharge of his duty. Benson ran around on the other side of the wheelhouse, then darted up the steps to the bridge. Turning, the skipper came to meet him, but this left a naval seaman in his wake, who brought down the butt of a rifle over the master's head. Down on the bridge sprawled the skipper. He was not quite unconscious, but he knew that he had received the worst of it. "Is the gunner's mate on board?" shouted the submarine boy, leaning over the port side of the bridge. "Here, sir," answered the mate, running forward with more seamen. "Come up here," Benson ordered. "Put the irons on this scoundrel." In a trice the skipper was ironed. Ensign Hal Hastings was now on board. He hurried forward to report. Counting the injured sailor, there were now 10 more besides the 2 officers and the gunner's mate now on board. "Mr. Hastings," rang Jack's voice. "Sir, enter the wheelhouse and relieve the man or men you find on duty in there. Use violence if you have to. Ring the signal to stop." As the quickest way of obeying the order, Hal ordered some of his men to smash the wheelhouse windows. Then 2 men got inside, covered by the rifles of their comrades. Inside were found the 2nd officer and a quartermaster. "You 2 are relieved from duty and will exercise no further command," Jack called down from the bridge. "Mr. Hastings, send them below, and place them in irons if they try to come up again." The engine room signal was given, and speed stopped. "This is an infernal outrage," roared the skipper of the steamship, as soon as he began to understand more clearly what had happened. "It is an outrage, and has been one for a long time, I fancy," Benson retorted dryly. "But you won't do any more mischief for a while, sir, nor will your ship be engaged in smuggling again very soon." "There's no smuggling been done by this craft," insisted the master. "Save that and tell it to those who will believe you," advised Jack Benson. At Jack's direction, Hal now took the bridge while Jack went to the captain's cabin to find the ship's papers. The gunner's mate, with 2 seamen, was sent to round up the deck officers. In the saloon cabin, the first officer was found, talking with some 50 or 60 passengers of both sexes. "But we can't find the third officer, sir," reported the gunner's mate, after a search of some minutes. "Let him go, then," directed Lieutenant Jack, returning with the ship's papers. "Probably he doesn't count for much anyway." Jack Benson himself now stepped into the saloon cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called in a quarter-deck voice, "if you will oblige me with your attention for a few moments, I will explain what may have seemed strange to you. This steamship has been caught in the act of transferring smuggled goods to another vessel. The Bengo is therefore seized as a prize of the government. This ship will be taken to New York Lower Bay, and there turned over to the Revenue Customs authorities. At the same time, you will all doubtless be set ashore, unless it is charged that some of you have had a hand in the smuggling that has brought about the seizure of this vessel. Now, I will ask you if any of you observed the throwing of cargo overboard astern a little while ago." "I believe I can answer you for the entire party," replied a handsome elderly man, stepping forward. "None of us saw any cargo going overboard astern, for the simple reason that the stewards told us that by Captain Lafont's orders all passengers were to remain in this apartment. The reason given us was that a part of the cargo had to be shifted before we reached New York, and that passengers on deck would be in danger of getting hurt." "Thank you, sir," was Jack's acknowledgment. "I think I understand how this Captain Lafont has been able, trip after trip, to run in and transfer smuggled goods without the least danger of being reported by one of his passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, the officers of this vessel have been relieved from duty. My junior officer will take this vessel into the lower bay of New York. You will look to Ensign Hastings as the master of this ship for the time it will take to complete her voyage." Probably in the minds of the assembled passengers there arose some wonder at the age of this boyish-looking young lieutenant. Probably most of the beholders imagined Benson to be older than he looked, for he was supported by real United States sailors from a real enough submarine craft. There could be no doubt that he was genuinely a naval officer. "I assure you all," Jack wound up, "that at need you will find Mr. Hastings a most competent officer and a most courteous gentleman. I will now wish you a good night." With a graceful bow, Benson left the cabin. Outside, he called to the gunner's mate. "Arrange to take our injured man back on the Grant," Jack ordered. "Then get over the side yourself." Lieutenant Benson next went forward to the bridge. "Mr. Hastings, you will take this ship to Lower Bay, New York, and there turn her and your prisoners over to the proper revenue authorities with the ship's papers, which I hand you now. It will be found that there is still some cargo aboard that is not down on the manifest, a good enough proof of smuggling. On completion of your duty, you will wire me at Boxhaven. I will advise you to keep strict guard and to tolerate no nonsense from officers or crew on this vessel." "I shall be very careful, sir," Hal answered. Go ahead as soon as I signal you from the Grant." "Very good, sir." As Lieutenant Jack hurried to the port quarter to call the Grant closer, he met the young man from the State Department. "Hello," hailed Jack pleasantly. "So you came with us?" "Of course I did," rejoined Ned White. "Why should I remain where none of the fun was happening?" "I'm glad you saw it," Jack Benson replied heartily. "I was so busy that really I didn't have time to think of you." "That was the way I figured it," smiled Ned. "So I came up the rope anyway." "Up the rope?" "Surely. I didn't know you had that accomplishment." "As a college man, I've had the advantage of some gym training," Ned explained. "Can you get back by the rope?" "Oh, yes." "Here's our injured man, sir," said the gunner's mate, turning from the rail and saluting. "Can you go down a rope, Sims?" asked Benson, looking at the man keenly. "Yes, sir, I think so," replied the seaman groggily. "I'm inclined to doubt it," Jack went on. "We shall do better to lower you." The same rope was at hand. Jack Benson signaled to the deck watch, and the Grant moved neatly in alongside. "We're hauling up the rope to lower a man who has been hurt," the young lieutenant explained. "Stand by to receive him." "Aye, aye, sir." The rope was made fast under Seaman Sims' armpits. He was lowered, Jack, Ned, and the gunner's mate holding to the rope. There was but one seaman on deck, as the only other left on board the submarine was at the wheel. "Go ahead, gunner's mate," ordered Jack, as soon as the rope was free. "We need you on the Grant's deck." So that petty officer let himself down by the rope. "After you," Jack announced, smiling at White. "Do you want a net spread to catch you?" "I'll show you whether I do or not, you josher," muttered White in pretended anger. "Just watch me." Grasping the doubled line, young White went down very well until he was within 4 feet of the Grant's deck. Then, just as luck would have it, he lost his hold. Striking the sloping deck prostrate, White rolled down the slippery surface, but the gunner's mate, running forward from the turret and with a surer footing, caught him by one arm. "No going overboard, sir, without the commanding officer's permission," remarked the mate dryly. Getting upon his feet, Ned fled below. He didn't want to face further joshing from Lieutenant Jack Benson. That young officer, however, had more important matters on his mind. Reaching the deck of his own craft, he handed the line to the lone seaman there, who hauled in and secured the rope. "Helmsman, signal for slow speed ahead." Jack called at once. "Port your helm. More a port. Steady." As the little submarine forged by alongside, Jack Benson signaled Ensign Hal to go ahead. "Good luck," shouted the young lieutenant through the megaphone. "Thank you, sir." "The same to you, sir," called back the young ensign and prize master on the bridge of the Bengo. Clang sounded on the engine room gong of the big steamship. That craft began to move ahead. Clang, clang, sounded the signal for full speed ahead. Hal Hastings was in command of the largest craft whose bridge he had ever trod. But the Grant was no longer alongside. Cutting a sharp circle, the submarine had swung around and was going back, her searchlight playing in wide swings over the waters. Some 4 miles away to the southwest, the light picked up the dull grayish sails of the Velvet. "That fellow isn't headed for Boxhaven, sir," observed the gunner's mate. "He may think he isn't," replied Jack Benson with a grim smile. "Deck watch here, sir. My compliments to Mr. White, and ask him to join me on deck if he has nothing better to do. Helmsman, bring us around and keep in the wake of that schooner. Ring for extra speed." "I suppose you want to tell me what you think of my rope work," murmured Ned, almost shamefacedly, as he reached the platform deck. "No," Jack answered. "I had forgotten that. I wanted to ask you what you think of our night's work." "Fine, if it doesn't get you into trouble," declared the young man from the State Department. "Trouble?" repeated Jack, feeling a bit disturbed. What trouble can come to me from having done my duty? It's like this, whispered Ned. The owners of the Bengo are pretty sure to put up a big fuss, and a lot of Admiralty lawyers may be found who'll question if you had sufficient ground for seizing that ship. The real fight will be in the courts. End of chapter 21. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 22 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 22. Skipper Redbeard's Maneuver. Ned White, it will be remembered, had been trained as a lawyer. More than that, his further experience in the State Department at Washington had done much to put him in touch with the laws of the sea. No wonder Benson was disturbed, even if he did not betray the fact on the surface. If I did anything irregular, what was it? He asked. That skipper had no right to refuse to let us board him. Not if you had any legal reason for going on board, Ned admitted. For that matter, whatever your reason in boarding him, any skipper that sails is bound to let a United States naval commander board him on the high seas. But after that comes the review of the courts as to whether the naval officer was justified. His ship was engaged in smuggling, Jack asserted stoutly. Can you doubt that? No, but can you prove it? He was throwing cargo over the stern, and the schooner was picking it up as it floated. You can prove that, I suppose? Ned inquired. By Mr. Hastings and my helmsman. That part is sound enough, if backed up by other circumstances, Ned agreed. How about the rest of the evidence? I am pretty certain, Jack went on, that the master of the Bengo didn't get all of his smuggled cargo overboard. Hal Hastings will see to it that no more goes overboard on the run to New York. I seized the ship's papers and turned them over to Hastings. I don't like the sound of that any too well, Ned declared. Of course the results may justify the measure that you took, but still, how are you going to prove that the schooner took the stuff with intent to smuggle? The schooner had no right to take cargo on the high seas, except in case of wreck of the transferring craft, Jack Benson argued. Moreover, this isn't the first lot of stuff that the schooner has smuggled into the United States. The other night, she brought in perhaps 40,000 Havana cigars. They must have come from some vessel on the West Indies run. Can you prove that the schooner smuggled in cigars? Ned pressed. Well, I know where her skipper hid the cigars, Jack retorted. And so does Hal Hastings, for he was with me. Further, I have already reported the hiding place of the cigars to the authorities at Washington. Maybe you haven't put your foot in it at all, Ned White suggested hopefully. I trust that you haven't. I don't believe I have, Jack replied. I have tried to act in a legal manner, and if the Secretary of the Navy had been aboard tonight, I don't believe he would have changed my orders. Jack hastily, briefly related the history of the matter to date. Of course, you've good sense on your side, Ned White admitted. In my own mind, there isn't a doubt that these fellows had been engaged in a deep-laid smuggling scheme, and you caught them red-handed. But the technicalities of the law are many and crafty, and those rascals may yet escape conviction. What you've got to do, Benson, is to look out in the event of these rascals slipping through the courts, that you're able to make out a good enough case of justifiable action on your own part. That will save you from censure. Censure, repeated Lieutenant Jack Benson with a bitter laugh. If these smugglers were acquitted and the trial court expressed disapproval of my action, Do you know what would be the result for me? What? Trial by court-martial and probable dismissal from the Navy service. As bad as that? Gasped Ned White. Probably every bit as bad as that. Then I'm very certain that I wouldn't want to serve as commanding officer in the Navy. Oh, yes, you would, if once you had a taste of the life, cried Lieutenant Jack, with all the enthusiasm of his ardent nature. Yes, you would. There's no finer career on earth than that of being an officer in the United States Navy. Yet a commanding officer always has to be on his guard, for neither the Navy Department nor Congress will ever sanction any unduly harsh action on the part of a naval commander. Had that Bengo's skipper attempted a more stubborn resistance, and had we been obliged to kill even one man in overcoming that resistance, then I would have had to face a very strict investigation. A naval commander always has it impressed upon him that he simply must not be guilty of any conduct that interferes with the rights or the life of another. By this time the Grant, still with frequent use of its searchlight, had come up within a quarter of a mile of the schooner. That craft had crowded on all sail, evidently with the hope of escaping capture. Jack ordered the gunner's mate to fire a blank shot from the 3-pounder. Not a sign came from the schooner of easing of sheets and coming to. Give her a solid shot across her bow, gunner's mate, was Benson's next order. Bang! The solid shot struck up a little geyser of water barely 100 yards ahead of the Velvet's bow. Skipper Redbeard plainly doesn't mean to give up without a fight, laughed Lieutenant Jack grimly. Nor did he know at that moment on just how much of a fight the skipper of the Velvet was resolved. End of chapter 22. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 23 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 23. Odds of 9-2. He isn't going to lay to, muttered Benson. Shall I put a solid shot in her plank, sir? Asked the gunner's mate. No, mate, I don't believe we would be justified in that, as we can board that craft. We'll run alongside and jump aboard. White, I'm going to press you into service and take you along as prize crew, for I can't spare any of our seamen from the Grant. Going to leave me alone aboard that schooner? Demanded Ned, becoming interested. No, I shall be there with you. I'm going to make that skipper go back and pick up the part of the cargo that he left floating in the sea. Then I'm going to make him take us into Boxhaven Bay. Quite a program, nodded Ned White. You're not armed, are you? No, why should I be? You'll have to be as a member of a prize crew, gunner's mate. A service revolver and box of cartridges for Mr. White. Very good, sir. Jack next gave the order to run in close to the Velvet. Presently, with Jake at the wheel, Skipper Redbeard stepped to the rail. Stranger, he bawled, you'll have to sheer off. You're a power vessel, and you're not giving this sailing craft all the sea room she needs. That easy style of conversation won't wash your flag, Jack called back grimly. This is the United States Submarine Grant. We desire to board you and have fired 2 shots to bring you to. Will you lay to and stand back for us to board? Not if you sink me for refusing, came Redbeard's doughy answer. Then we're coming aboard anyway, and the risk be on your own head, Jack Benson retorted. Turning to the gunner's mate, he added, Mate, I shall leave you on board as acting commanding officer. You have but 2 seamen, so I shall leave them both on board. You have a full engine room crew. you will be able to take the Grant into Boxhaven Bay and reach moorings safely. I can spare you one of the 2 seamen, sir," urged the gunner's mate. "You will need him more than I, sir. No, it would not be right to cripple this government craft to that extent. Mr. White and I will be able to take care of the 2 men on board the Velvet. As soon as we are aboard and you receive my signal, mate, you will head for Boxhaven Bay." "Very good, sir. Now run in as closely as you can to the schooner's windward side without sinking her. Try to run up within 2 or 3 feet of her rail, and Mr. White and I will jump for it." "I will put you so close, sir," promised the gunner's mate, "that you will be able to step aboard." "Be careful, mate, not to injure either the schooner or this craft," Jack ordered. "Aye, aye, sir." Ned held his loaded revolver in his hand. "Better put that in your coat pocket unless Skipper Redbeard starts something," Benson advised. His own revolver was out of sight, though his sword still hung at his side. "Sheer off! Shove off, I tell you!" raged Skipper Redbeard as the submarine lunged up dangerously near. "Keep your wheel steady, my man Jake," shouted Jack. The deck watch of the Grant covered Jake with his rifle in case the helmsman tried to throw the schooner off of her course at the moment of boarding. Such a trick might very easily be played. "Drop off and let him fall in the water," hissed Skipper Redbeard. But Jake glanced sullenly at that Navy rifle covering him and took his own orders. There was a slight bump as the moving Grant lay alongside the schooner under way. Jack sprang to the Velvet's deck, followed by Ned. The next instant the submarine drew off. "Take your course to Boxhaven Bay, gunner's mate," Lieutenant Jack directed. "Aye, aye, sir." The Grant started on her way. Redbeard, his arms folded, surveyed the young naval officer with a sullen glare. "What do you reckon you're doing on board this craft, young man?" the skipper demanded. "I have seized it in the name of the United States government," Jack replied, as he walked past the skipper to the stern. "But we're Americans, and this isn't wartime either," jeered the skipper harshly. "You're seized on a charge of smuggling," Benson retorted. "Smuggling tonight?" snarled the skipper. "Certainly." "How can I have smuggled tonight when I haven't been back anywhere within the 3-mile line?" scoffed the schooner's master. "How about the other night?" Benson demanded. "What other night?" "The time you brought in perhaps 40,000 Havana cigars." "What do you know about that?" "The most that I know is what I overheard you saying to each other. Of course, I also know where you took the cigars." Skipper Dave Hume looked a bit aghast over this thrust. "You missed a box of cigars, didn't you?" Benson went on coolly. "They're in Washington now." Deckhand Jake Denham gave a gasp. "I reckon I know where my pistol went to now," he muttered sullenly. "Yes, it's in the wardroom on the Grant." Benson laughed. "Shut up, you blithering idiot," yelled Skipper Hume, going toward the helmsman. "Let Jake talk if he wants to," teased Lieutenant Jack. "He isn't annoying me." "No, but he's—" Hume checked his speech abruptly. "Go on," urged Benson dryly. "You go to blazes," roared Dave Hume. "There's another direction in which I want to go first," suggested the submarine boy. "Jake, bring her up in the wind. Put your wheel over hard a starboard." "Jake will do nothing of the sort, you uniformed young jackanapes," growled Skipper Hume. "You may think you command here, but you'll soon be satisfied if you're even a passenger. We're going about and pick up the rest of that drifting cargo, or as much as we can find of it," Benson retorted sternly. But again Hume paused, for the submarine craft was still near enough so that a pistol shot signal might be heard. "Oh, well," growled the skipper grudgingly, "let this young jackanapes give you your orders, Jake." "Thank you," Benson answered mockingly. For half an hour the schooner sailed along, Benson acting as sailing master, while Dave Hume sat amidships, sullenly smoking a very black pipe. "We'll soon reach that floating stuff now," Benson declared. "No, we won't," roared Hume, rising. "At least, if we do, you'll have nothing to say about it. Jackanapes, you've run matters long enough. Come along, men." Forward, the hatch over the hold moved. 7 men sprang out. As they raced aft, Jack caught the legend, third officer, on the visored cap of one of the 7. The other 6 looked like ordinary seamen. Here, then, were some of the missing crew and the third officer of the Bengo. Their wet clothing showed that they had jumped overboard from the steamship, probably as the submarine ran up alongside the Bengo. "Show the jackanapes how you're fixed," roared Hume, his face aglow with triumph. Revolvers appeared in every hand. Jack and Ned had drawn theirs also, but they were 2 against 9, with not even the lights of any other vessel in sight. "Put down your weapons, boys," advised Hume dryly. "The jig is up for you both if you don't. We happen to be the kind of men who don't propose to be taken. Put your weapons down and drop into the hold forward. Then we'll drop the hatch over you and padlock it. If you do what I tell you, probably that will save your lives, but nothing else will. We don't propose to be taken." End of chapter 23. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 24 of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 24. Conclusion. "Neither do we propose to surrender," called Lieutenant Jack Benson coolly. "Jake, get away from that wheel." As Denham didn't move fast enough, Jack seized him, hurling him several feet away. "It doesn't make any difference if there are 100 of you here, backed by a battery of artillery. The United States Navy is still in charge of this vessel. Go forward, every one of you but Jake, and climb down into that hold." "You see us going, don't you?" leered Hume. "Now, boy, put down your pistol, or you soon won't have any choice about what happens to you." "Drop your own weapon and put up your hands," Benson commanded, sternly, covering the skipper. "It's time to settle with him, men," cried Hume, raising his own weapon. Hume's pistol spit fire, but so did Jack's. A second later, the skipper missed, then sank to the deck, for he had been hit. It was the third officer's turn next. Benson shot him down, then turned the weapon on another man. Ned White, not a whit behind, began firing too. For a few moments the air was full of spiteful flashes of fire. Shot after shot was fired in the dark night. 5 men of the smugglers were down when the other 4, throwing their weapons overboard, threw up their hands, shouting their surrender. "Are you men sure that you've had enough?" Lieutenant Jack demanded. "You bet we are," replied one of the seamen from the Bengo. "How about you, Jake Denham?" Benson asked, turning. "Whose orders are you going to take now?" "Yours," Jake agreed sullenly. "Ned, keep your eyes open, but go and pick up the pistols of men who've been hit," Jack directed. "Throw their weapons overboard." This was quickly done, no one of the cowed lot now offering any opposition. "But you wouldn't do this if you hadn't hit me so hard," growled Skipper Dave Hume. "And you wouldn't have been hit at all if you had behaved yourself," Jack retorted. "You uninjured men who have surrendered, get together and help those wounded men to the cabin. Look after them as well as you can." "Did you get hit?" asked Ned in a low tone. "Don't believe I have a scratch." "One bullet kissed my left hand," White declared, holding up that member. around which he had wrapped a handkerchief. "That's too bad," murmured Benson. "Too bad, eh? I'm tickled to death. Benson, I've actually sustained a wound while serving as a volunteer in the Navy. My father will be proud of me when he hears about it." "He'll have reason to be," Jack nodded. "You put up a good fight against odds." "That was easy enough," scoffed Ned. "All I had to do was follow your lead." Jake Denham, in the meantime, had brought the schooner back to her course. By the time that the wounded men had been placed in the cabin, the Velvet was in sight of several floating packing cases. "We can't stop to make too long a search," Jack explained, "but I want 2 or 3 of these cases as evidence." Accordingly, when near enough, the schooner's boat was lowered, the 3 remaining men from the Bengo comprising her crew. 3 large packing cases were removed and hoisted to the deck of the Velvet. Each case proved to be covered with waterproof material so that the salt water could not injure its contents. "White, will you kindly mark these cases in such a way that they may afterwards be able to identify them?" Jack requested. Ned complied with the request. "Jake, you may keep the wheel until we're fairly started on our homeward course," Benson added. "Then I will give you a relief with one of these other husky chaps." "Not going to pick up any more cases, then?" White asked. "No. Common humanity requires that we now get the wounded men as speedily as possible to a place where they may have surgical aid," replied the submarine boy. With a fresher wind springing up, the Velvet made Boxhaven Bay in about 2 hours. Jack directed the schooner's course as close as prudent to the Grant, now lying snug and secure at her moorings. "Deck watch ahoy!" Jack shouted. "Aye, aye, sir." "Is the gunner's mate at hand?" "Here, sir," replied the mate, stepping out from the turret. "I am Lieutenant Benson." "I know your voice, sir." "Mate, you will have to leave the engine room force in charge of deck and all. Bring your 2 men ashore in the gig and report armed at the Velvet's pier." "Very good, sir. Hurry." "Aye, aye, sir." Jake was at the wheel as the schooner gently approached her pier. With so many hands at the sheets, Lieutenant Jack was able to make an unusually neat landing job of it. Nor had he been long at the dock when the gunner's mate and 2 seamen reported, armed with rifles. "Take charge of the deck, mate," Jack ordered. "Let no one ashore or aboard without my order." "Very good, sir." "Say, you ought to let me go," whined Jake Denham. "Think how I've worked for you tonight." "I also remember that you fired on us in the mix-up," Jack retorted dryly. "You're one of the principal prisoners, Jake. After your skipper, you're really it." Ned was hurried off up to the Hotel Bel Air to summon such medical aid as could be had. Jack, in the meantime, stretched his legs, strolling up and down the pier. 3 country physicians responded to the call. When they arrived, one by one, Jack passed them on board. After the 3rd physician had come, Jack looked up in time to see 5 men hurrying on to the pier. "Halt!" cried one of the seamen from the Grant, throwing his rifle to port arms. "No admittance to this pier." "Who commands there?" called one of the party as the 5 halted. "Lieutenant Benson." "May I have a word with him?" demanded the speaker. Jack walked over to the group. "I reckon you'll be glad to see us, Lieutenant," smiled the spokesman of the 5. "We're Secret Service men." He threw back his coat. The others, doing likewise, all wore the official badges of the Secret Service. "Any other credentials?" asked Lieutenant Jack cautiously. "Yes, this letter." By the aid of lighted matches, Benson was able to read the letter. It was from Secretary Sanders and introduced the chief of this squad of Secret Service men. The leader's name was Watts. "I'm glad enough indeed to see you," Jack greeted them, offering his hand. "Mr. Watts, are you authorized to relieve me officially of this outfit that I now find at my hands?" "I'll take charge," nodded the Secret Service leader. "And I shall also be glad to have something of a statement from you." "I've been looking for you people all along," Jack smiled. "You left Washington late, didn't you?" "We left Washington within 2 hours after the department received your communication. We've had quite a few looks at your craft, Mr. Benson, from the shore. Yet you didn't come out and introduce yourselves." "We could work much better in the shade," laughed Watts. "We haven't been idle, though, as you'll soon learn. But show me what you have on board." "Be quick about it, if possible," begged Jack. "One of my officers has been missing since yesterday afternoon. I must find out what has become of him." "Do you mean Mr. Somers?" asked Watts. "Yes. Have you heard?" "Mr. Somers is at the Belleair now," replied the Secret Service leader. "I thought White would have sent you word. But if he hasn't, I'll tell you what happened. It seems that Somers knocked down in Washington an almost half-witted fellow who spoiled one of his new shoes. The half-witted one, Wimpins, a would-be actor, is filling a summer engagement at the Belleair as a waiter. Wimpins had the afternoon off yesterday. He saw Somers going by and trailed him out into the country. Wimpins struck Mr. Somers down with a club, then, terrified at his own cowardly act, ran away. We overheard last night at the hotel that Mr. Somers was missing. We suspected the smugglers, and so began a very thorough investigation. We found that Somers had been picked up by a farmer driving over the road. He took Mr. Somers to his house, then sent for a physician. We had Mr. Somers brought to the Belleair, where he has the quietest room in the house." "But how is he doing?" Jack broke in impatiently. "Oh, he'll be all right if brain fever doesn't set in. That's the danger now. While we were on the matter, we found out about Wimpins and watched his strange, frightened behavior until we were impressed with his guilt. Then we had a mysterious tip sent to the local constables who went after Wimpins. The lad broke down, confessed, and is now in the local lockup. The worst scared baby anarchist you ever saw. He expects to go to the electric chair for murder. It's strange, though, that Dr. Poole didn't tell you anything about Somers. Poole is taking care of your friend, and he's one of the physicians sent down here a little while ago." "Come aboard and let me turn this matter over to you," begged Jack. "I must get to Eph Somers without loss of a minute." In the cabin of the schooner, the three physicians were finishing their work of washing and bandaging the wounds. Dave Hume and Third Officer Lefoy of the Bengo were the most severely injured of the 5 men who had been shot. None of the patients, however, was considered to be in a serious condition. "Oh, Mr. Benson, you'll think me an absent-minded fool," cried Dr. Poole. "Mr. White particularly charged me to tell you about your brother officer, Mr. Somers, and I forgot. The work here made me absent-minded." "I'm going up to see Mr. Somers right away," Jack declared. "You'd only be wasting your time," Dr. Poole objected. "Mr. Somers hasn't a very clear head and wouldn't recognize you." "Is he as badly off as that?" asked Benson, paling. "He has been seriously hurt, of course, but I have some hopes that Mr. Somers' head will be clear by tomorrow." "In that case, he will be up and around inside of a week," the physician answered. "However, don't go to see him today. Put it off until I sanction your dropping in at your friend's bedside." "Who's taking care of Somers, then?" an excellent trained nurse who happens to be summering here. So, though terribly anxious, Jack was forced to go about other duties than the care of his chum. When Watts took charge, he had the uninjured prisoners removed to the county jail, while those of the smugglers who had been wounded were sent to the hospital attached to the jail. Jack withdrew his 3 men from the schooner, returning with them to the Grant. Half an hour after he went on board, Ned White, resplendent in spotless duck clothing, came off from shore. Before the two had finished breakfast, a wire came from Ensign Hal Hastings to the effect that he had turned ship and prisoners over to the proper revenue authorities at New York and was now on his way back. Hal and his 9 seamen were on board in time for the noon meal. "What do you think now of the legal side of my conduct last night?" Lieutenant Jack asked Ned as the 3 friends lunched in the wardroom. "The smugglers will be convicted. They'll have to be," Ned admitted. "The very act of that 3rd officer and several of his men leaping from the Bengo and taking refuge on the schooner, coupled with their pistol attack on you, will settle the doubts of any trial jury. The men are as good as convicted." Jack Benson had already, of course, sent a telegram to the Navy Department announcing the success of his work. The afternoon he devoted to making up a formal typewritten report to be forwarded by mail. While he was so engaged, he received from the Navy Department a telegram of congratulation for himself, his brother officers, and the crew. Concerning the smugglers, there is not much more to be told. The captain and other officers of the Bengo were duly convicted of smuggling and sentenced to the penitentiary for a term of years. So were the seamen who had jumped overboard with the 3rd officer and had been found on the Velvet. These men, on account of the pistol battle, received still heavier sentences, as did Skipper Hume and deckhand Jake. As it proved, besides the Bengo, another steamer running between New York and Havana had been engaged also in smuggling. The name of the ship on the Havana run was easily ascertained by Secret Service men at Havana, who, having sampled boxes from the smuggled cargo, easily traced that shipment from the manufacturer in Havana to the smuggling ship in question. So the captain, 2 watch officers, and a few members of the crew on the Havana steamship were also convicted. The brains of this gang of smugglers, however, was a syndicate of 3 wealthy rascals in New York, who had controlled all of these smuggling transactions. These 3 men were promptly caught as soon as some of the other prisoners had confessed their guilt. The 3 leaders in New York are therefore now serving long sentences of imprisonment. The smuggling along this part of the New Jersey coast was completely broken up. It was estimated afterwards that the United States government had been losing customs duties amounting to nearly $1.5 million per year. That, in other words, was about the amount saved to the national treasury by the clever work of Lieutenant Jack Benson and his junior officers on the submarine boat. It was 10 days before Eph Somers was able to be up and about. By this time the Grant was at Newport, Rhode Island, engaged on a real set of practice work there. On the 12th day after having been struck, Eph hired an automobile with chauffeur and was taken over to the county jail. He went there to see young Wimpins. When Wally was brought into the visitor's room and saw who his caller was, he turned deathly pale, then tried to bolt. "Don't let him touch me," pleaded Wally, as the jail guard dragged him forward. "Why so tremulous?" Somers demanded. "The only way that I want to touch you is to shake hands with you. Will you shake?" Do you mean it? Asked Wally Wimpins, incredulously. Yes, of course. Eph held out his hand. Try to forgive me if you can for what I did to you, faltered Wally. I'm going to try to do something more practical, smiled Eph, as he took the unfortunate's hand in his own. I was kept in after you patted me on the head for only 10 days, but a lawyer has told me that they're likely to keep you in for from 3 to 5 years. That doesn't strike me as quite fair. I shall be glad enough to escape the electric chair, faltered Wally. I find that I am neither as brave nor as desperate as I wanted to think myself. I'm going to try to get you off, Eph announced. What? Gasped Wally Wimpins, unable to believe his ears. Yes, I'm going to see the district attorney, smiled Summers, and show him that you've already been in longer than I was kept in. If the district attorney is a real nice sort of a chap, I think I can show him the right course to pursue. Eph was as good as his word, though he had to move quickly, for he longed to be back on duty with his comrades. Wally was allowed to go on a suspended sentence on condition that he immediately leave the state of New Jersey. Wimpins has given up both the stage and his former notions of vengeance. He is now employed as a shipping clerk in a shoe peg factory in Indiana. Ned White enjoyed to the full his 30 days on the Grant. He became so accustomed to going beneath old ocean's surface that he soon ceased to think of it when the boat was submerged. When his leave was up, White bade a regretful farewell to his young hosts. Write to us when you get back to your desk in Washington, urged Lieutenant Jack Benson. You may hear from me in the newspapers right away, suggested Ned, with a dark look. When I return to the State Department, my first business is going to be to inflict an awful punishment on that fellow Jones, the author of the get-rich-quickly savings scheme. What do you think of my idea of luring Jones to the top of the Washington Monument and then throwing him off? Don't do it, begged Eph solemnly. Profit by the Wimpins example. Work out your spite on Jones by letting him die a natural death. However, we shall again hear from our young submarine friends. Their further doings of importance are described fully in the next volume of this series, which is published under the title The Submarine Boys' Secret Missions, or Beating an Ambassador's Game. This exciting narrative has to do with the intrigues that set nations by their ears. It gives many a glimpse of the way that governments conduct their affairs with each other. Our readers will find in this volume a wonderfully fascinating history of events in the affairs of nations that have hitherto not been made public. The plot is a thrilling one, the action swift, and the adventures extraordinary. In this new volume, we shall also meet several old friends. The end. End of The Submarine Boys and the Smugglers by Victor G. Durham. Recording by John Brandon.